Hi, welcome to Module 5, the first part of our Human Resource Management class. We're winding down and we're almost at the end. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about compensation and benefits. It's probably the last area of incentivizing employees, employee motivation, but also as we continue to talk about the tensions between employee and employer in the workplace. So there are a number of philosophies as far as how we compensate employees that work for us, and we're speaking both in terms of profit and not-for-profit organizations. So a lot depends on the organizational philosophy, how decisions are made, how much money they have to actually place in this pool in order to compensate employees, what types of compensation do they appreciate the most, should they be paid for seniority and longevity or based on their skills and talents or based primarily on what the marketplace says the value of that individual's background, experience, and skills are. So there are a number of things that go into making this decision. One thing we also look at is something called wage compression. If we find ourselves, particularly in an inflationary period where we begin hiring new people in at higher levels in order to attract them to our organization, then we find that new people are often paid as very closely to those who've been there for a while, who have a lot of organizational knowledge and skills within the company. And this is something that employers can struggle with. Less so now in a more static economy, but as our economy picks up, it'll become more of a problem. Also, one of the things I like to drill into new managers' heads in particular is that you can tell employees that it is against policy for them to talk about their salaries, but be assured they all talk. They pretty much know what others are making or what they are told others are making. And another thing to remember is that often people embellish what they say they're making. So don't be surprised if these issues come up. And the best defense against this is a fair and equitable compensation system that you can support and defend in any discussion with any employee. So I mentioned the philosophy towards compensation is important. One is what we call the entitlement philosophy, and that's not using the word entitlement in a negative way. It has to do more with seniority, and the longer that somebody has been with the organization and displayed loyalty to the organization, the more they're paid. Partly this came about in the early years of manufacturing and companies because it was felt that those who weren't doing their jobs would be fired or reduced into a different lower level skilled position, and so therefore it would make sense that anybody who was actually employed would be a good worker. And as probably many of you are smiling and thinking, that is not necessarily the case today, but it is part of the origination of this concept. Another philosophy is about performance. The impact that somebody has on the organization and outcomes has more to do with has a direct correlation and relationship with the amount that someone's paid. So another way to look at how we value jobs in terms of payment is by looking out in the marketplace. Look in the area of the labor pool from which you draw employees, and look to see where other companies and competitors are placing the salaries and compensation of their employees. And this is done typically through salary surveys. One of the positive things is that employees can feel that externally they're being valued and they're paid a fair wage based on others doing the same job at other companies. A negative or a drawback can also be that if a salary survey is not done well or they don't have a lot of responses, it can have a skewed answer or average, and also there can be rather wild fluctuations in the economic base of that area, and so you can get some different answers from time to time. But as I mentioned, we do this through surveying other competitors, and this is confidential. We make we make sure that we're very careful not to list actual people or specific data. We list anonymous data. So for this job title here, how many people are making X number of dollars, etc. And then we list other things like salary, besides salary, like vacation and profit sharing and any other perks or benefits, health insurance, etc., that employees might have. One of the things we have to be careful about as we conduct these surveys, though, is that they aren't used in a manner that would suggest that there's any kind of price fixing to keep salaries at a lower level in a particular job market. So as we look at this package that we call compensation, it includes both cash and non-cash items. Typically it starts with a base salary, which is what we consider the salary that the individual earns. And then we can add additional amounts to that. For instance, if you work overtime, or if you have a shift differential. For any of you who work swing or graveyard or holidays, there's often a different differential that's added on, a premium pay for that. Also, there are incentive pays that can be issued for performance, and we talked about that in the discussion board last time in Module 4, so we had a pretty good discussion on that, and I think as we saw there are both pluses and minuses to that. Of course, there are benefits, which are what we consider to be indirect compensation, and those are things like non-cash benefits such as health insurance, dental insurance, profit sharing, 401ks, vacation pay, sick time, paid time off, etc. So as we look at putting this whole system together, we should remember that we actually start with the organizational objectives. What is the vision of the organization? What does the organization stand for? What is their strategy in the marketplace? And whatever we come up with should very much be in alignment with this. Other things that we should consider are that whatever structure we come up with is fair and equitable. This becomes particularly important as we implement it. And it's not only the actual fairness of the system, but the perception of fairness that's very important. And employees will look at both outside, or people in other companies making similar pay or more pay and benefits, and then they also look internally. And I've listed a couple of things here they look at. One is procedural and one is distributive justice. The first is the process itself in deciding how the wages, the process itself, is that fair? And then the second one is how the benefits are distributed themselves, the outcome, is that fair? And both of those are very important. And then as we look at the external part, the market compensation levels in our area, one of the things we as companies have to decide is what is our strategy. So some organizations want to be right in the middle, they want to pay average, and that's pretty much it. Others want to pay less, maybe they're a low-cost leader in terms of their overall strategy. And others want to pay more than the average employees make in their industry in a given area. And so I know that in the last business that I ran, we made a concerted effort to pay above average for all of our employees in the various wage categories. And part of that was we had a very high quality, high service strategy, which meant we needed people who felt highly valued and would come to work excited about what they were doing and feel good about how we felt about them. And it seemed to really match our strategy well. And the outcome actually was that although our employees were very high performers and went above and beyond and were paid more on a national average and on a local regional average, we actually had fewer full-time equivalent employees than the average because they were performing at such a high level. But they didn't feel understaffed. So, you can make a system what you want it to be. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this module, that part of this has to do with motivation. And this is a lot about how we implement it and how employees perceive what we're doing. And if we look at the expectancy theory, it's important that what employees view as fair and equitable is such. And we dialogued a little bit about this when we were talking about incentives. It's very important to communicate well and to clearly define the goals and the process to reach those goals. And then that they have value to employees. If you offer a benefit that nobody cares about, then that is a silly thing to do. And of course, we have to follow up and do what we say we will do. One of the questions I have for you, and you might pause and take a moment to think about this, is whether or not you would rather have higher cash pay or better benefits, and why. And typically in the on-ground classes when we discuss this, each class that I've taught, I've gotten different answers. Sometimes it's tied to the economy and where we are in terms of the employment level, and it just varies from group to group. So it'd be interesting to know how you felt about this. Another theory that we look at in terms of perceived equity is equity theory itself. And it says that if employees believe that they are underpaid or underrewarded, then they will do one of two things. They will either work less, in other words, they will throttle back in what they're doing, or they will demand that you increase the rewards to match what they perceive their work level as being. Another not surprising thing is that if people feel that they are paid too highly, that in other words the pay and benefits are too generous, they typically don't worry about it and don't say anything as a whole. Also, if they feel that the pay and benefits are equitable, then often they will continue doing what they're doing until they feel that they are out of balance in a negative way towards them. One thing that you can do as your company grows is to develop different pay grades within skilled jobs and non-skilled jobs. So for instance, you may have steps. In my organization, we have steps. And some organizations, they just have different quartiles that you can march up within a certain pay range. And that can be based on experience, skill development, and different things like that. It can be based on time served in an organization. Again, it really gets back to the organization's philosophy on compensation. There are some things that are fairly common in ways of distributing compensation. As I mentioned, one is based on seniority, and that actually has to do with how long you've been in an organization and in a particular job. Many of you receive what we call COLAs, or cost of living adjustments. They don't really amount to much right now because our inflation index is quite low. Typically these are tied to the consumer price index. Another way of distributing increases is just to give everyone in the organization, say, a 4% raise, so that everyone gets a certain increase. Sometimes that is the outcome of a compensation survey. If you find that as a company you're below market standards in your area, you might want to do something like that. Another thing is what we call a lump sum increase, where perhaps there is extra profit in a year and the company leaders want to distribute that among the workers to say, good job, well done. But they don't want to make it an annual practice because their profits probably fluctuate, so they'll do a one-time lump sum increase or bonus for all employees or a group of employees. Again, we dialogued about incentives, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Another name for that can be variable pay, where it's based on performance and productivity, whether you're in manufacturing or service industries. And it's a way of tying the compensation directly to performance rather than based on seniority or some other reasons that you might use for determining the compensation. Some of the reasons that we look at that is to hopefully align these objectives, these incentives, with organizational objectives, and that helps companies get towards their final mission and objectives in a more efficient manner, and it allows employees to set goals, achieve more, they can earn more money, and that sort of thing. And if done well, then it can be a method in which employees are more satisfied and motivated, and it can add to retention and reduce turnover. So, but as we mentioned in our dialoguing, it's very, very important to clearly communicate the requirements of the incentive plans. We also have to set realistic goals that can actually be met. Otherwise, they de-incentivize employees and create a negative problem within the organization. Of course, we want to tie them to our objectives for the organization so that we're all in the same menu and we're getting things done that enhance what the organization is meant to do. So beyond that, we also have wider goals or incentives, and one of these is profit sharing. Oftentimes this comes in the form of a 401k or a profit plan, retirement plan, where the company puts money in whether or not the employee actually contributes to the plan. I know we did this at the last organization I worked at, and again, remember, this was a high-performing, high-service, high-quality environment and culture, and so it was important for employees to see some of those profits being returned to them. And it was something that, as our employees were there for a while, they continued to give us positive feedback about. One of the things we noticed in today's environment in particular is that a lot of the people we hired had education debt, and they didn't feel that they could begin setting aside money for their retirement right away. So if we started doing it for them while they were paying down their student loans, that allowed them to feel more comfortable and less stressed about their future. So it may be something that we begin to see, and something for you as business owners and managers to begin thinking about. So we often have a special kind of compensation plans for our sales staffs, and I would say most of you are probably familiar with these. They can sales individuals can be paid just on salary. They can be paid on straight commission or a combination of both, and including bonuses. There are sometimes gifts that you can earn, trips, things like that, as goal setting incentives as well. As we move away from cash compensation, we begin talking about the indirect compensation area, which is generally titled benefits. And benefits are a way of adding additional signal of value to the employee. And you'll notice here on the screen we have that its benefits can cost anywhere from 30 to 80% of total payroll costs. Benefits can be wildly expensive, and it's something I think that employees often don't recognize. But having purchased benefits for our organization, I can tell you that it is a struggle to find quality benefits at any kind of reasonable price. Again, we go back to the strategy of the organization and the philosophy of compensation for the organization in the choice of benefits that we offer. Also, what are standard in our industry and our marketplace. That makes a big difference in what we offer as well. So oftentimes I like to say to managers and HR professionals, the best way to determine which benefits are a good fit for your employees is simply to ask them. You'll be surprised sometimes with the answers that you get. I know we did that 4 or 5 years ago, and we were surprised because we had a fairly young workforce to get an answer that was life insurance. And we realized in talking to our employees that many of them were single parents with children and school debt, and they wanted to not leave their children or family strapped. Some of them had long-term illnesses. A few of them were breast cancer survivors. So several of them could not get life insurance unless we purchased it for them first, and then they could add on. So again, asking your employees is a wonderful way to find out what really truly matters to them. And I can tell you, just the process of asking also adds huge benefit and raises your the respect they have for you in the workplace. There are some benefits that are set by statute, by law, and some are paid. These are paid by the employer, but also they have a portion that is, some of them that is paid by the employee. These include Social Security, Medicare, and workers' compensation. Some of you may not be aware that a small amount comes out of your paycheck every time to go towards the workers' compensation fund. The employer pays into all of these funds as well. The employers also pay into unemployment insurance fund and the last two items on the screen are really about mandated, legally mandated acts. benefits that are available to certain employees based on the size of the company, and some of the things we learned about in the first module where we discussed HR law. But they are important, and they are considered benefits. COBRA is the ability for you to travel, to keep your insurance once you have left your job, although you do have to pay for it. That COBRA is the federal statute. The states also have a state statute. COBRA allows 18 months of continual coverage as long as you pay for it. The state of Oregon, I believe, is 12 months, and again, you still have to pay for it. So it's determined by the size of your company, by the number of full-time equivalent employees. And then, of course, many of you are familiar with HIPAA, which we typically think of as the Privacy Act in health insurance, but it really was primarily designed as a health insurance portability and accountability act, but the portability is a very important thing. There are also benefits that employers consider benefits that often employees consider entitlements or givens, and those are the ones you see on the screen, which are reasons to be absent from work with pay. So whether it's it's some sort of paid time off, whether it's holidays or illness, vacation, or just personal time off. Many employers lump all of them together into one big fund that's called paid time off, and the employee is allowed to draw on that as needed. And that's very helpful because I know when we used to have sick leave, we found that our employees who were very dedicated rarely used their sick leave, but they also, if they needed to take personal time off, they had no way to spin that down unless they called in sick and had to lie. And we didn't want to put them in that position, so we went to the big fund of paid time off, and it worked much better for us. So thank you for paying attention and listening about compensation. In the next module, which is our last one, part 2 of Module 5, we'll explore the world of safety in human resource management. See you then.